The Bill Simmons Podcast, presented by FanDuel Sportsbook. All right, Russillo's here. We're doing this the first time we've been in person together since, maybe March 2020, pre-pandemic.
Yeah, because it used to come up. I mean, I like the routine. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, not that we want to start this with a non-Sixers Ben Simmons after the Bucks just won, but yeah, you got a big family now.
Yeah, my son has grown 8 inches since the last time we saw him. Literally, he's unrecognizable.
He's like Giannis from his draft.
We thought, yeah, that's true. They showed that Giannis graphic where he grew 3 inches and gained 60 pounds. Yeah, it seems like more than 3. So tonight, it seemed like the Bucks were going to win, and it seemed like Giannis was going to have a great game. Then everyone on NBA Countdown, they picked the Bucks. Jalen turned around and yelled to 65,000 people, "I had my Bucks in 6-bet." And I'm
hammered,
like, I'm screwed.
By the way. Good for you.
I'm screwed. I stayed away. I didn't hedge. But this became the Giannis game. This was a Giannis superhero event. He was the story of these finals. He was the story of the last 4 weeks. He is at a completely different place historically. And I got to say, Russillo, one of the best finals games I've ever seen anyone play. I was not alive for Bob Pettit, and we can go through some of the other ones from the past. But that was as good as any LeBron game I've ever seen. That was as good as any Larry Bird game I've ever seen. That was a phenomenal performance on a night where his teammates, nobody was really great other than him. Just Bobby Portis, I guess, was good, but just an incredible performance by a guy who deserved to win the title.
Yeah, you know what? I think when you're watching it all, like it just has felt so genuine with him forever. And let's face it, I mean, Milwaukee's an awesome basketball city. You know, Phoenix is actually a great basketball city too. So you felt bad, like when you look at the ratings, you're like, okay, this. But as far as the passion of both of these cities and the fan bases that are like, these are really good basketball fan bases. So to see Giannis, you know, like everybody's probably wondering, like, hey, how are you doing with the Chris Paul thing? We'll get to that later.
Get to it later.
Yeah, because it's just, you can't do that before what you saw from, like, it reminded me a bit of like the Dwayne Wade finals for his first title, where it was like, you know what, Dallas just can't do anything with this guy right now. And a lot of it was free throws. And that's on the other thing. I mean, I'm not talking about the calls. The fact that Giannis, who becomes this guy that you're like, you know what, how many times can you go to him late in a playoff game because he can't make his free throws? And then he makes them all. I mean, if he's back to normal Giannis, we're going back to Phoenix for game 7. And he goes 17-19. And he's just had these stretches throughout this finals where I think it was fair to worry about him in the Nets series, which I want to get to kind of his timeline of this year and then further it out in his career. But there's just this genuine part of him that look, let's be honest. There's certain dudes, if they were running around tonight celebrating a championship, deep down, you're like, And with Giannis, I would think he probably has one of the highest approval ratings of any stars in the league, both by other players and also by just, you know, neutral fans in general. So I'm happy for him.
We both discussed this on our podcast over the last couple of days, how this was the best outcome for the NBA in a lot of ways, because it's basically like, if you think of the NBA like NBC in the mid 1990s, where they have Friends and ER, and then they're always trying to get that second spot behind Friends.
Boston Common.
Suddenly Susan and all those, they're just trying. The NBA, we kind of thought we knew who the stars were, right? And we thought we had Giannis pigeonholed as the certain guy who won the 2 MVPs, and everyone was like, all right, we're good. He's not winning a third one. He was the all-star captain against LeBron, but hadn't even, you know, sniffed the finals yet. And it just felt like, all right, he's kind of maybe just a snitch below, right? And then he completely changes everything. He's the number one guy in the league. He's now the best player in the league. He's the number one asset in the league. I would say he's probably the most liked player in the league right now. If you're just talking about, you said approval rating.
Yeah, like the Q rating. I brought that up in my pod this week. Like they used to do studies on all of us to be like how likable you were and what your positives were and what your negatives were. And look, more so like you and I probably could already figure that out. But like GMA, you know, the Today Show, they research this stuff. That's why you'll see like certain like really chipper meteorologists have decades-long careers because their Q ratings are high. And for someone like Giannis, it's pretty clear that like I just don't think there were a lot of people watching him tonight rooting against him. I don't think there are all sorts of Bulls fans, even if we're talking about geographically close, that were mad. I don't think there's a bunch of Miami Heat fans that were mad. There are so many other players that you would just go, okay, there's so many guys rooting against a handful of other names that we can come up with. Hell, even LeBron, that I'd imagine a lot of guys that were just watching that love the NBA were happy for him at the end of this thing. And that's kind of how I feel. I mean, dude, 50 points. I mean, this is Wilt Chamberlain stuff, except he won.
You'd think like the fuck this guy theory, right? When somebody's successful, and then the backlash comes and there's the fuck this guy element comes in. If you're at like a bar in Manhattan Beach in 2 weeks and there's a group of people and they're talking about the finals and somebody in that group is like, you know what I fucking hate is Giannis. Fuck that guy.
It would just you'd be like,
what? Why? Like you'd almost be stunned. It's pretty hard for an NBA player to get to that point. I think Steph got there in the mid 2010s. I think LeBron got there early in his career, like somewhere in the 2008 range.
The Detroit series, by the way, like as you mentioned, this is better than any LeBron playoff game. I don't know. I might push back a little just because of how special that Detroit game. Well,
I just think it was bigger stakes.
Yeah, right. Finals compared to Eastern Conference. You got it. You win. But I mean, that was just LeBron going.
Well, and the other thing,
I still think that LeBron game where he won 25 straight points and beating a Pistons team with that
was amazing. I think that was one of the best playoff performances. But I'm just talking finals.
It's not a clinching game 6. You're right. Right.
There's a different energy in the building for these games, and you could feel it. Like we were watching the first couple minutes.
That was one of the worst stretches of basketball I've watched
4
all
minutes.
Season.
It was like, can somebody call a timeout? Neither coach knew if they should be the one that called the timeout.
Everybody was so tight. Nobody could hang on to the basketball. You're like, what is this? Like, you guys playing a 21?
Right. So once it settled down, and it was clear, like, oh, we're headed for this terrible Drew Holiday game. He was 1 for 11 at one point. It's like, I talked about this on my pod 2 days ago. This was the scenario for the Suns to win. One of the things that needed to happen was for Drew to suck. He sucked offensively. He was good defensively. And they have the 29-18 lead, and they blow it. Phoenix comes roaring back, and nobody in Milwaukee is playing well except Giannis. And Giannis just figured out how to play the Suns team. He figured out Ayton completely. He just solved them. It was like watching a receiver torch the same cornerback over and over again, right? He could go left on him, go right. He could jump hook him. He could just draw fouls. They're putting anyone else on him, he could just get around the rim. And he just figured out over the course of, I think, 2 rounds, I have more size and strength than anyone in the league, and I cannot be stopped. And I'm just going to, over and over again, hit people over the head.
The Ayton stuff is really frustrating, though, because I think, him getting into foul trouble in this game changes everything because they have no depth. They had to go to Frank Kaminsky, like for real minutes, and be like, hey, can you help us keep this thing alive and bring us to a game 7, which is asking a lot of Frank Kaminsky, especially when you're talking about defensively.
Yeah.
What I don't like about the way it's called, if they ram into each other like 2 young mountain goats, that should just be like, there's a lot of physical stuff they're letting go in this series. These are the calls LeBron started to get, like, 6 years into his career where he's like, I'm going to the basket, and if you bounce off me, I'm going to the free throw line. That's kind of the part of it where you're like, all right, well, we don't have, then there's nothing we can do. And then there's no depth behind him. So when Ayton's out of the game, whether you go back to game 3, where I think he only played 24 minutes. But the other part of it, too, is Ayton was terrible offensively. And this is the part of the Ayton storyline where even at its peaks, it was really great. And now you have something that you feel really good about as a building block moving forward if you're a Suns fan. But I think anybody that's really locked into DeAndre at times, like he was, look, I mean, it's his first time ever. He's in a clinch game trying to keep this thing going, but he was bad offensively. I do have sympathy for, though, his defensive stuff, because you're basically just ramming into Giannis and meeting him at some sort of collision, which is sort of initiated kind of by both players. So some people could say it's a foul every time.
Too. The refs are
the fouls thing was, hey, look, 17 fouls called in Milwaukee, 21 on Phoenix, 10 plus free throws.
Relative.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think the Giannis free throw thing, I mean, that's really what this was. Again, if he's normal Giannis from the free throw line, what he did tonight, and then when he got into a rhythm, I actually think he was shooting quicker too. It didn't feel so.
Well, here's why you could. I'm going to go through the list for you of the greatest kind of closeout games. I think so he's 50 points, 14 rebounds. He only misses 2 free throws, 16 for 25, 42 minutes, 5 blocks.
5 blocks too. And like nasty, full effort. And that's the other thing with him, full effort.
Like that play, it looked like he got hurt.
Right, the Booker play, where Booker actually finished.
And I think that's when you talk about him versus some of the other guys I'm about to give you. It was the two-way stuff. And then on top of it, like, you don't want to go back to Phoenix. You don't really have anyone else helping you. So at some point he realizes, like, if I don't do this, we're not winning tonight. So there's that factor. And then the free throws and the fact that over again he came through. But the big ones. So Pettit in 1958, 50 points. Game 6, the only one of 2 finals Russell loses. Russell has a sprained ankle, misses basically the whole series, plays on one leg in game 6. And Pettit destroys him. And it's why Pettit has to be in any top 25 ever. He's not only one of the best scoring forwards of the last 60 years, but destroys Russell.
He is somebody historically, when you go back and look it up, he's never brought up enough.
No, he's like the Barkley Malone kind of that era, but actually won the finals. So he's in there. You have 1980 Magic, famously, no Kareem, does the triple-double, jump center. Awesome game. Jamal Wilkes is great in that game, too. You have the MJ Utah game, 1998, which I still think is the greatest game anyone's ever played because he's got Pippen with the bad back. We talked about this when we did our MJ content. Rodman's basically an alcoholic at that point. He wins the finals by himself. 2003 Duncan almost had a quadruple double in the closeout game and just demolished the Nets. I think it's because it wasn't a great Nets team. I think people haven't given that the respect that it was due. Just go back and watch that game on YouTube. Then you had the big game James in 1988, where he had, I think, 37, 39, something like that, just over and over again delivering. And then there's a 77 Walton game where he's 20, 23 rebounds, like 5 blocks, and it's just like two-way. His passing,
he's controlling
all the
everything.
Stuff he did. Yeah, he's just controlling the game. You could make a case that this was the best one, at least since the Magic game. I mean, I'm sorry, at least since the Jordan game. And it's in that conversation. And that's why this is such a significant night. Wherever you rank it, and it doesn't really matter, and a lot of us weren't even there for some of those games, it's a short list. And Giannis is now on that list. And he's on a list with Pettit and Walton and Duncan and Jordan and Magic. And then James Worthy, if you just want to throw in the rando. Sam Jones had some good ones too. But that's why it's such a significant night. It's more than a title. At some point, you're talking about legacy and history, and we're going to have the 75th anniversary coming up. He was not on that list. He was not one of the best 25 players ever. He wasn't going to be mentioned with Shaq and Hakeem and Moses. And now he's there, and that's it. That's how it plays out.
Yeah, those are the rules. And this is how fragile it all is, too. And if you look at it now, Giannis 26, 27, I think, at the end of the year, right?
Yep.
Third player in league history to have an MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, Finals MVP in a season, and that's with Hakeem and Jordan. All right. So when you start, I made this joke about the Lou Dort Awards because I think offensively we've seen an explosion that wasn't always corrected at certain points throughout the playoffs. This was a grinded out type of deal. So this isn't 50 with like all the bullshit. This is 50. Again, 50 is
hard 50, like right. Dunks under the basket, right. Reverse dunks, alley-oops.
25 on 25 shots. And it's all of the effort around it. And so this is something I do think it's important to bring up. We know as a draft pick, and you look at it, you're like, all right, I don't know what to do with this guy. You know, physically, he's gifted. He was playing against really, really lower competition. So it was kind of absurd whenever you watched any of it. And I did.
I compared it to Paul George at the draft. That's what we thought he was. We thought he was a 6'9" forward.
Right. If Paul George was like forced to watch his brother at a junior high game and also played in it.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Exactly.
So, and I think even George, who was raw, had a little bit even more polish, which, you know, is saying something because George was raw. All right. So then, you know, the beginning of his playoff career isn't that great, although, you know, it was almost like retroactively more dismissive because they blew the 2-0 lead to Toronto, which again was a really good Toronto team and like uber Kawhi.
They had overtime in game 3.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that could have been an NBA Finals at a really young age here. We're talking 24 for Giannis, all right? So he wins the MVPs in back-to-back years, and then last year they get blasted by the Heat. So then you start rethinking all of this. And this is kind of how the ebbs and flows of it all, right? With all of these guys before they actually get to this category. Well, now you have that ring and you have it in your back pocket. You're going to have it in your back pocket for the rest of your career. So it's kind of the tiebreaker. It's the settler. So then, you know, he wins the second MVP, and then they've made adjustments. They're a 3 seed. He's still putting up insane numbers, but we're over it now, right? Like the same way we were over it with Curry and back-to-back MVP years where it felt like after they blew the 3-1 lead, there's all this animosity now, and like the Warriors aren't cool. So now I don't know that Curry can ever win another MVP, even though, again, he got back into the conversation this year. So then when you look at all of the concerns that we had about the Bucks offensively, which we thought were like totally legitimate, like not attacking Harden, Bud might have been fired if Durant's foot wasn't behind the line. Like,
well, we both think Carlisle would be the Bucks coach if
I don't know if he would have done it to him, but go ahead.
Well, I think that's what would have happened. I think Bud would have gotten fired, and I think they would have hired Rick Carlisle.
And so think of the other conversations that we were having. As you're watching the Durant-Giannis series play out, you're like, look, Giannis is awesome, and he's MVP, but we can't ever put him in that category with Durant, right?
Durant went toe-to-toe with him, and he was slightly better.
And a carryover from last year, like peak Anthony Davis, which isn't cool right now because he's hurt all the time, which makes us forget how insane it is. And I think he's behind Jordan, LeBron all-time in playoff PER. He's third all-time in NBA history. I don't know what it is now. Maybe it's down because of the injury. But it was like, look, who would you rather have to give you a bucket? And you're like, well, Anthony Davis, because there's so much more to him. So that's how fragile this stuff, right? But that's kind of my point, though, is that's how fragile this stuff was. That I think all of those concerns and the critiques and the ranking of being like, look, when a couple of weeks ago, when I'm saying like, yeah, we can't really, let's remind ourselves to never put Giannis in that group with KD. Now, after this game is closed out and the series is over, that seems like an absurd thing. You just called it his league, and it's hard to argue against it, even though. Again, that point of 2 weeks ago, I thought 4 weeks ago. Yeah, right. All right.
Well, think the KD thing, though. The reason we thought heading out of that series, the Bucks won, but KD is the best player in the league because it was like nobody else could do what KD just did in those last couple games when he basically had an ice cold Joe Harris, Harden on one leg, Blake Griffin, and it was like
if you get a D+ version of Joe Harris.
Yeah.
It's at any point.
So it's like,
series.
well, the difference between KD and Giannis, leaving that as great as Giannis was in those last couple games, is like, well, he couldn't. If you flip teams, the Bucks still win, and the Nets don't do as well with Giannis. I think what was amazing about him, and this really since he came back from the knee, was I thought he reached that Durant Nets level where there was stuff going on with him offensively. Like it was really like watching somebody figure it out. The only experience I can compare it to is like if you have kids and you have a kid that in 4th grade is something, and then in 5th grade, you're like, oh shit, I didn't realize they could do that now. Or like 5th grade to 7th grade, whatever. It's pretty rare to see somebody in their mid-20s actually add shit like he did. Like LeBron added a low post game as he got older. But he was like, he peaked in 2013, right? He just got kind of better at everything.
Yeah, I don't know. He caught the ball in the post. I never felt like he was just working.
No, I'm saying he by 2018, he tapped into the power, like that famous Warriors game he had, where he realized how to overpower people, which he didn't know really how to do the first half of his career. But all of it made sense, the progression. The progression that Giannis had in the last 4 weeks, I think is pretty surreal because he was somebody that in the last 4 minutes I just didn't trust. And then
so now you're comfortable then saying that he is Durant and closing a game because of tonight?
No, I'm not comfortable with that. I am comfortable in saying that his decision making in the last 4 minutes, his choices that he made. How about the
passing in Game 5 of Phoenix?
His passing in Game 5, the screens he was setting for Middleton, and then knowing like when to roll to the rim hard on alley-oops, when to like just use his strength when there was no other option. I was really impressed. I mean, obviously impressed, but like I just didn't think he had it in him. And I know you didn't either because we've talked about him a bunch of times.
I didn't think that, he was somebody I still would want, tie score 40 seconds left because, I wasn't sure, especially when you factored in this guy all of a sudden was a massive regression at the free throw line. But I mean, if this is what you're going to give me, then it kind of changes everything. And the fact that here's the thing that I always came back to, because I think all the criticisms were fair, but one thing you can always build on is like who's comfortable and who isn't. And I think we saw some people throughout this series that were comfortable and then not so comfortable all the time.
Yep.
And with him, there was never a doubt. And it's the thing that I love about him. I loved it like back when Philly and the Bucks were kind of first going at it with all their guys in some of these regular season games. And I brought this up before, but like watch the way Giannis would go to Embiid and almost be excited to be like, let's see if he can block this shit.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm going to just go right at you. So when you have a guy that has that kind of heart, that kind of fight, and then, afterwards, he was so sincere and just, it seemed like how much he cared about this. That's an incredible like personality trait, emotion to build on. And so there's more skilled guys. I mean, let's not freak out too much here, but there's never ever wavering. That's 6 straight finals games.
I don't know. Are there that many skilled guys? Like the 360 spin moves he was doing and the stuff he does in the air.
I think Durant at 7 feet tall, like pulling up dribble is like as smooth as hell.
Here's one guy who made a jump. And it was a subtle jump, but it was a jump. Like Hakeem in the 94 and 95 seasons, where he was already an MVP candidate. He was already one of the best players in the league. But in those 2 postseasons, 94 and 95, he went to another level.
Yeah,
like he figured out the game slowed down for him in a way that I felt like the game slowed down a little bit for Giannis because it always felt like he was pressing. It felt like there were ways you could stop him. It was like watching a quarterback. It was like Peyton Manning in the 2000s where you're just like, all right, in the playoffs, Belichick's going to come up with some defense to slow him down.